Today's date is January 26, 1994, and we're pleased to have with us Dr. Robert Gracy, the Associate Dean of Basic Science and Research here at the University of North Texas Health Science Center here in Fort Worth. And we're doing the videotaping in the Gibson D. Lewis Library in the Biotech Communication Center. I'm Blake Hailey, and after saying all that, I think we're ready to go, Dr. Gracy, if you are.
Fine with me, sure.
If we could go back in time to when you first came to Texas and at UNT, I believe, and talk a little bit about your relationship with UNT and how it developed into the relationship with TCOM.
Well, I came to, as you said, Blake, I came to UNT initially, not knowing anything about TCOM or any of these things. I was at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and was recruited to the University of North Texas in 1970 and came into the Department of Chemistry. And they had looked toward developing a Department of Biochemistry, and that was the main focus that they were interested in, and so they attracted me to come in and head up an effort to develop a Department of Biochemistry at the university. And I came to Denton and established my lab there, and that first year was kind of tough in the sense that there were no other biochemists around, and so I didn't have any colleagues I could really communicate with. And fortunately, the people at the University of Texas Health Science Center in Dallas, in Southwestern, at that time had one of the, and still do have one of the outstanding departments of biochemistry in the country, and they were very helpful in saying, if you need some help or you need to use some space, and we'll provide it to you. And so they were very helpful. And in that first year, I got my program going, and then I was fortunate in obtaining a Career Development Award from the National Institutes of Health. And that was a 5-year award that would pay my salary, and so we were able to do that and then release the salary from the university to hire another faculty member in biochemistry. And we hired Mike Jacobson. We brought in Ben Harris from biology, and we began at that point a core of, I almost hate to say core, but 3 people to put together a biochemistry start of a program. And then fortunately in 1972, with the TCOM coming on board or becoming a part of the equation, that gave us a tremendous new opportunities. And I'll tell you that when that happened, I'd never had any experience with osteopathic medicine, and I didn't know what a DO was, and had absolutely no concept. But they put together a program where we would, of course, teach the first 2 years of basic science on a contractual basis
At Denton.
in Denton, and we rapidly remodeled the attic of the biology building to have room for lectures, and actually in the first years we had lectures in the biology building before the remodeling could take place, and that began the program, and but that did give us the opportunity to bring in new people to create nucleus of faculty who could be involved in generating basic types of academic programs.
So you did that till, what, about 75 or so, as far as that? Or did you and then move down here to Fort Worth with that same department?
No, well, what happened, Blake, is that between 72 and 75, we continued to teach the program in Denton. We recruited some new faculty in the various departments. I was just a faculty member in biochemistry. Gordon Skinner was the chairman of biochemistry, and each department kind of developed, and it was a situation that I think many places have seen in a good deal of flux. And we had offices here, offices there, in the Health Science Center, and some renovated dormitories in the chemistry building and the biology building. And it was communication was not ideal.
Oh no, I can see.
So, and then in '75, of course, the contract, I mean, the legislation was put through to make TCOM at that time part of the institution and a state-operated medical school, and that obviously gave us an opportunity to look at this as a long-term commitment rather than just a commitment for what had been for the previous 3 years.
And it's about that time you went to Germany as a visiting professor, and about 76 or so, is that right?
Right.
And then you came back to Denton and Fort Worth and continued on in the same role you were in?
Well, not exactly. I took a sabbatical at the end of '75, left in December of '75 to go to Germany to learn some new techniques and to work on our research program there, and which was very successful. And while that period of time was evolving, a lot of changes were going on in Denton and Fort Worth. And somewhere toward the end of my sabbatical, I got a letter, that was long before faxes and things came so quickly, but I got a letter or a phone call, and they indicated that they wanted me to take over the chairmanship of the Department of Biochemistry on returning. And
you probably contemplated staying in Germany.
Well, I started exactly. I thought about staying in Germany, but came back and in September of '76 assumed the chairmanship of the biochemistry department.
And you were housed in Denton and still commuted back and forth? Was that about the time that the River Plaza building was utilized?
Yeah, well, that's right, Blake. Again, the whole scenario, as you know, has been one of continual flux, and I guess at times that was frustrating to people, but in retrospect, I think it was very, very good, because we were moving and doing all kinds of things, and it was and it is an exciting thing to see that continual movement that we have in this institution. But came back, and there was some facilities that were being leased over in the River Plaza area. MedEd 2 was opening and being completed, and a big change from the old bowling alley and things. I mean, I even taught lectures in the old bowling alley. That was.
I was going to ask if you'd done that.
Oh yeah, I remember those. But things were really starting to take shape, and it seemed like there was a long-term plan evolving, and I don't think anybody had all the answers, certainly, but the departments of the basic science departments that were housed in Denton began to move down to the facilities as they became available. Some labs became available in MedEd 1 and some over in River Plaza. Physiology, pharmacology, anatomy, microbiology pretty much moved their facilities from Denton to Fort Worth. Biochemistry by that time had grown to be a very large department, and we had a big graduate program, and there was simply no space in either River Plaza or MedEd 1 to take care of our obligations in labs. So we got offices over in River Plaza, but no labs. And
you had to come over here to do the lab work.
Well, no, we had to keep our labs. We kept our labs in Denton, and so we drove every day back and forth. And I think I would challenge anyone to tell me anyone who has driven back on 35W more than the biochemistry faculty during that period of time. But so we drove back and forth literally every day.
How was the relationship at that time with the faculty, in a sense of the two institutions, and some of you I think were joint appointments, if you will, at UNT and TCOM. Was the relationship with the other faculty members and the regents and chancellor, so on, was that pretty good, or were there some problems?
Well, yeah, I think there are always, when you have two institutions evolving with two independent sets of goals, there are going to be some conflicts. But what happened was, and biochemistry was the department that was serving both campuses. Mm-hmm. We were the only department of biochemistry that functioned at TCOM, and the only department of biochemistry that functioned at UNT at that time. And so we were being asked to do things in both campuses, and sometimes there were conflicting things about, you need to do this at this time or you need to do that at that time. But out of that grew some interaction, and out of that, by necessity, grew some interactions between the two vice presidents of the two institutions, and I think it required that the two institutions start to think about working together and looking at some things, and partly because of that, the group called INTEC at that time evolved to try to, that was an acronym for North Texas TCOM. I don't remember the last two. I think I have to look that up. But the point was it was a collaborative committee. Maybe that was the last two, but I think that's not exactly right. But a committee that would meet on a regular basis with the vice president of the two institutions and a number of us that were involved in joint programs. And the idea was to see what could be developed that would be mutually beneficial to the university in Denton, as well as the evolving campus here in Fort Worth.
You were spread pretty thin back then, it sounds like, going back and forth. Who was the vice president of TCOM at that time? Do you happen to recall?
Well, we went through lots of presidents and vice presidents.
A laundry list.
Yeah, I've seen 5 presidents at UNT, and the vice presidents at least an equal number in those areas. And let me just say that I will, in retrospect, say that all of them made some very major contributions to where we are now. And while I might have myself argued with this one or that one at this time, I mean, I think they all made major contributions in aiming toward this institution becoming an academic institution rather than becoming a trade school or a very narrowly focused school, which could have happened at that time.
When did you finally get into one or two particular buildings where you didn't have to go back and forth, but maybe a couple of steps in walking distance? What time of
well,
year
again,
was
Blake, that took a number of years. It didn't happen overnight. When MedEd 2 began to evolve, and I was happened to be on the planning committee, and we had an excellent group of people, all the way from the president to people in administration to faculty to some outstanding architects and people that we had as consultants. And we went around and looked at other medical schools in Texas. We went to Philadelphia. We went to a number of other places to look at specifics about animal facilities, research labs, and so we designed this building with a lot of input from a lot of people. And I think while people might disagree about one thing or the other, it's turned out to be an outstanding facility. And so when this building, when MedEd 2 was completed, that was the first chance that biochemistry had to move from Denton to Fort Worth. And so we moved in one bolus of people moving at one time, but we still didn't have complete space for everybody, and in fact, only a year and a half ago did we get the last person really moved in. So it's been a gradual process like all these things.
What was your position at that time as far as your title and all and your responsibility? Were you still in the chairman part, or?
Yeah, I was still chairman. At that period of time, I was chairman of two units. I was chairman of the Department of Biochemistry at TCOM, and I was also chairman of the Division of Biochemistry at UNT. And that, I guess sounds more schizophrenic than it really was, but the move was made with a lot of cooperation from a lot of people, so it wasn't without problems either.
Right, but the relationship even today then is still pretty good with the UNT faculty and our faculty here, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah. We've had, it's an evolutionary kind of changes, and during a portion of that time, for example, I chaired for 2 years also the Department of Microbiology and Immunology, and so there was one period of time where I was chairing 3 departments at one time, and so I mean, schizophrenia maximum, but everyone worked very much together and realized that this was an evolving process, and I think that we have a great number of interactions with UNT today, both in research and teaching.
You probably some days wondered where you had to go, it sounds like, what hat to wear, so to speak. I know that they're planning on adding a couple floors, or a possibility of adding 2 floors to MedEd 2. Are you going to be involved with that committee to plan that, or do you?
Yes, we are actively planning that program, and the architects have been meeting with us to extend this building 2 more floors. When MedEd 2 was built, it happened at a time when inflation was very heavy, and the original plan was to make this building the same size as MedEd 1, to make it a 8-story building. But the time that was required in the architectural drawings and the land acquisitions and all of those things, the dollars shrunk, and so we had to build a smaller building. But we did that with the anticipation that we would eventually add on to this, and so this building was structured to accommodate 2 more floors on it. So that can be done now without any major additional cost.
Now that we are a health science center, I want to talk about that in a second. And you've also been doing a lot of research. Could you go into some of the research aspects you've been doing? I know from looking at some paperwork on you, you're into quite a bit of things. Gerontology, I believe, was one, and the eye, and so on and so forth. Could you discuss a little of some of your research activities and where you are today on some of that?
Well, yeah, when I can kind of put this in historical background too, Blake. When I came from the Einstein, I came with a program. I had submitted a proposal even before I came to look at some genetic diseases and carbohydrate metabolism, and in fact the grants were funded even before I moved here, so I had to a certain extent a running start, and we moved through those and we're working on those projects I think quite successfully. And actually, when I was at the Einstein as a postdoc, a colleague of mine had said, like any postdocs, you ask people, what are you going to do when you grow up? And he said, well, I'm going to work in aging research. And this was 1969, and I said, aging research? I mean, I never heard of that. Nobody ever talked about aging. I said, well, why would you think about that? And he explained to me his reasons, and I thought, well, it's kind of interesting, and I just blocked it out and never thought about it again. And then, 8 or 10 years later, we were working on this completely unrelated project, and we kept finding some very strange patterns in the laboratory on gels and some analytical things. We couldn't understand what was going on. And we had been forced to go into looking at human cells because this genetic disease is very rare, and it's essentially lethal, and the homozygous child basically will die. And so we had to get cells in culture, and we began to look at these, and we couldn't understand why these differed. And then we brought everybody back into the lab, and we sat down and looked at all the lab notebooks and said, why is this so strange? And spent a lot of hours looking at it, and we found that the difference was because of the age of the cells that we were looking at, the donor's age. And so we said, well, this is very interesting, and we began to develop an idea of that this was an age-related modification. We put a proposal into the National Institute on Aging, and it was funded, and then we began to develop the program, which has expanded a great deal, to look at why modified proteins accumulate as we get older. And then we were very fortunate in after our program got going, and we had, I think, a very successful 5 years or so. We were very successful in being chosen to receive a merit award from the National Institutes of Health, and this is an award that.
Is merit? Is that an acronym for something?
Yes, that's yeah. I don't know that acronym either, but it basically is one that the NIH picks a very small group of laboratories which they feel are highly qualified to work on an area, and that the area is a high priority area. And so we were fortunate, I guess, in the sense that we were working on an area in molecular changes that occur in aging, and I guess we had established ourselves as being, our laboratory as being nationally recognized. And so they awarded us this merit award, and I got a letter and suddenly found that we had a 10-year commitment for funding of the program. And that of course made a tremendous difference in the potential that we could explore, because that meant that we didn't have to write grants every 2 or 3 years, and we could devote our time toward doing the research.
So you still have the grant? It's still we're still within the 10 years.
Right, we're still, and we've been very, very, I think, active. I have an exceedingly outstanding research group that we've been able to put together, and the credit to the goes to them, not myself. But and so we've expanded it beyond areas that we could have done at that time. It's a great deal.
You're far too kind on yourself. It sounds like you've done a lot from what I can gather in that field. You also were a while back, I know, working on getting is it Stedman's to help out or come down or something? Is that is that coming along?
The
okay?
Stedman's, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's been a very interesting proposal, and it relates to what we were just talking about. Our program in aging developed and was very successful because we happen to have a lot of good people around us, and it comes back to the point that you mentioned earlier, and that is that the University of North Texas up in Denton had established a Center for Studies in Aging back in 1962, or it happened at this time that Michigan and North Texas were the first 2 universities in the country to establish an academic unit, Center for Studies in Aging, and this was long before any place thought about aging as being a real academic question. And the unit at North Texas developed mainly in the area of sociology and healthcare in that sense. And it went along for a certain number of years under the direction of a very, very competent leader, Hiram Friedsam. And Hiram came over to my office one day and said, how about getting some biochemists and biologists and people involved in aging? And so we looked at it, and he put up some money out of their grants, and we got a unit going in biological aging. And that happened to dovetail with our own interest in getting into aging. So we had, at that point, a natural evolution of a core or a nucleus of people who had some interest in aging. And so what then happened was we began to, as the mission of this institution grew and developed, clearly there was a commitment in terms of preventive health and healthcare, long-term healthcare, in the clinical departments to explore aging. And so we developed within the Department of Medicine a geriatrics center, and that allowed us to expand not just into basic research but also to the clinical areas. And so now we had a much broader scope. We had a scope that covered the sociological and areas that were covered in Denton, the biological areas that were being covered in our basic sciences, and then the clinical areas that were now covered in our clinical departments. So only if we had that could we approach to go to someone like the Statmans at the NIH, people who are National Academy of Science awardees and have a huge reputations. Only then could we approach them and try to say, would you be interested in possibly coming here?
It sounds like now you have all the bases covered. It sounds like in the study of aging, at least in that field. What other types of research do you have an interest in, and are you working on? Is that your only focus, or you kind of spread yourself real thin there as well?
Well, we are hoping that we don't spread ourselves too thinly, but we're a growing institution. You hope you find colleagues in areas that will pick up and help in all areas. So we established the Aging Institute here. In fact, when I came back from sabbatical a few years ago, Dean Cohen said, let's establish that one as our first shot as a center of excellence. And we did that, and it's going very well. And had we not done that, we certainly would not have been able to even begin to attract the Statmans. In fact, when we established that first institute, we brought the Statmans in to give the introductory talks and at the inauguration of the institution of that institute, the Institute on Aging. Mm-hmm. But that has been very successful, and I think you may know that we just this week got a major grant. Dr. Knabel just received a grant that's going to be in the area of between $1.5 and $2 million for her studies in training clinicians in geriatric care, both in dental and general care physicians. And so that's just one example of how this whole area is blossoming, I think. But back to your question, there are a number of areas that we have seen as extensions of this, and I don't think they're separate. The Vision Institute, for example, was an extension of that, because obviously as we age, vision problems become a major problem in most all elderly people, whether it be glaucoma or cataracts or diabetic retinopathies. And so we began to establish a core of people to look at vision. And we established a group of people who met monthly and talked about it. No support, whatever, outside of just talking about their own interest. And then Jim Turner came and is leading that institute. The other institute that Dr. Harbans Lal is leading in substance abuse was the third institute to take hold. And then the other one that we are very involved in is wound healing or wound care. And that one is just getting going. And obviously, wound care, again, relates back to aging, because as we get older, the ability to heal wounds is markedly impaired. And no one seems to know why wounds heal so much slower as we get older. And so we have a major effort that's directed toward looking at those kinds of things. And obviously that involves clinical, a great deal of clinical as well as basic people.
So all these areas of research that you're doing all in some form revert back to the research on aging, the very first thing you did.
Right. And it relates back, ironically, to my colleague who sat around at the Einstein in New York and I said, what are you going to work on when you grow up? And he said, aging. And I said, why would anybody want to work on that? And, I find myself completely in...
you could have walked down the hall and he would have asked you 5 minutes later, you probably wouldn't have remembered it, but
right.
Many years later it came back to haunt you, so to speak.
Yeah.
So now this happened, the Aging Institute, you said that Dr. Cohen had y'all start as the first one. Was about, what, 1990, right after your second trip to Germany?
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so kind of want to get a feel for the time.
Right.
Why is it important for us to be a health science center in regards to what you're doing? Do you think it's very important, or will you be able to continue on with the research in the same vein you were when it was just TCOM?
Well, I think it's very, very important, and I think it's one of the most important. I mean, looking back for 22 years or such, you look at landmarks along the way, and I think this has been a tremendous landmark, because it establishes us as something more than a school that was focused on the training of osteopathic physicians. We were very good, and we are very, very good, and we will continue to be outstanding in that and lead the osteopathic medical profession. But this gives us the opportunity to be recognized as a health science center and expand into many other areas, some of which we were already doing and weren't getting recognized for at the graduate program. We had built a graduate program
from ground up, basically?
From the time that we were in Denton to the time that we were here. So that goes back 20 plus years. And that program has been solid, and we've been reviewed by a number of groups nationally, and they look very carefully at where you place your Ph.D.s, where do they go, how successful have they been, and so on. And we've had outstanding records on that, and we're very proud of that, of course. So some of the things have evolved again to where we are now, but being a health science center not only gives us the credit for those things we've been doing, but allows us now to expand into other areas that are natural for us to develop. Obviously this time with changing healthcare programs and responsibilities is a very, very challenging time. It's not going to be easy. We've got to be creative. Funding is for research is much more difficult now than at any time in the last that I know of in my life. And yet we've got a core of people here in both clinical and basic science who I personally am very proud of and feel very confident in meeting that challenge.
I seem to see that a common thread through a lot of what I've researched so far is, to all the people I've talked with, is the healthcare issue is very big on your minds right now, and where that puts the school and all. I've been noticing that. How do you view this health science center versus the others in Texas? Is it markedly different, or we are kind of running about the same.
Well, if you compare us, it depends on what you want to compare. If you look at size and numbers of programs, or numbers of people, numbers of students and such, we're still a small player, a small relative to some of the bigger institutions. In terms of the quality of research that comes out of here, it matches, because we publish in the same journals, we're reviewed by the same people, our grants go to the same study sections, and so I think that we're very satisfied to go up against any other institution in terms of quality. We're not as big, but I think quality stacks up against any of the other institutions. And it's not a competition. You have to understand that each institution works very, very closely together, and our colleagues in Dallas, for example, work with us all the time in terms of exchange of information and techniques. They send people over here to learn new techniques and methodologies, and we send people over there. We have seminar exchanges, technicians and postdocs going back and forth all the time. And so it's really while we all have different names and different budgets, from a scientist standpoint, we work together almost as a continuum. So I think that it's an exceedingly healthy thing. And of course, that's one of the beauties of what we have in Fort Worth, and that's starting to sound like a Chamber of Commerce here, but one of the beauties of this institution is having Southwestern across the Metroplex and having the airport in between, because when you recruit new faculty in, you can say, look, you're coming into an area that's got lots of folks in our own institution, lots of folks in the community who are dedicated to this, tremendously dedicated community. And we also have people in Dallas at a much bigger place in Southwestern. If you can't find a specific thing that we don't have, right, you can probably find it there. and then, in our profession, you have to travel, or you have to have people who travel in and can come in to give seminars and talks and whatever. And the airport is, of course, a tremendous asset to us.
Definitely. Where do you see the Health Science Center going in the future?
Well, I think we've been very, very fortunate in that when we began to put together the mission statement of this school, and this happened over in River Plaza, and I happened to be one of the people with Charlie Ogilvie and Kim Core and a few of our other, I think, very foresighted leaders who sat down every week and we developed the so-called mission statement. And it dealt with preventive medicine, and it dealt with those things at a time, again, before they ever were being discussed in the general media or the general public. So we were way ahead. There's no question. We were way ahead in planning that. And the evolution of where we put our efforts, our clinical efforts and basic science efforts to a certain extent, have been along the areas of preventive medicine. And of course, now we see that the whole country recognizes that, and of course, the new healthcare program, any healthcare program that evolves out of this, is going to certainly have preventive medicine as the foundation. And so we're in a very, I think, fortunate situation. We had at the outset the mission of training physicians who would be involved in primary care, who would go out into the rural areas. I mean, everybody wants to say they would like to do that now, but we've been doing it. So I see us evolving. We're not necessarily wanting to be the largest institution, but I think we do want to be absolutely quality-wise the best. And I think the president has said it numerous times. Quality is the key word, and if we stick with that and use that as a key word, whether we're talking about basic science research or whether we're talking about clinical practice or we're talking about teaching quality to our students, whether they be medical students or graduate students, things are going to work out.
It sounds like then with the healthcare proposal the school is in a good position to make changes very easily then to whatever comes out of that in the next few years.
Well, changes don't come easy.
Right.
And I mean, well, I don't want to paint a picture that looks so rosy. In retrospect, you know, we're where we are, and it looks very nice, and it has been fun to see it. But it's not been a straight shot. It's been a roller coaster, and there's been down times, and there's been times when we've had to fight. When faculty have had fights with administration has had fights with Austin, and so on, and those will continue. There's no question that it's a constant battle because resources are limited. If we had maximum resources, I suppose we could charge on with total abandonment. That's not the case anymore.
Do you see your role? It's changed significantly, I think, since we've become a health science center. Is that correct?
Well, my role currently, when we became a health science center this last September, I accepted the position as the Associate Dean for Basic Science and Research. So my duties have changed somewhat, yes, in that period of time.
The big question, I guess, is where do you see that particular area going, or where do you see yourself going as far as the health science center is concerned?
Well, before I took the position, number one, the dean assured me that I could keep my own research program going, and I think that's important. Not from a selfish standpoint. I think it's important that people who are involved in administration maintain active programs in both teaching and research, and so I think that otherwise you get a situation that is isolation from what really goes on, and if as an administrator I can't be frustrated by the funding situations, and I can't adequately be sympathetic or apathetic with people who have those problems, and if I'm not teaching and understand the frustrations with student attendance in classes or things, then I can't be really relating to the faculty who have those same problems. So that was one of the things. So I maintain my research program and my teaching just as I did before. My only change is that instead of chairing a department, I am the Associate Dean for Basic Science and Research. So it's more of a global picture, but it's things that I have a fairly, I think, good picture of, and I've had experience in. But what it means is you look at what can be developed, for example, in the clinical realm of clinical trials. Where can what kind of opportunities can we bring in to give our clinical faculty more types of opportunities in the area of research? Education, basic science, it means that basic science opportunities are also changing, because you can't rely strictly on the NIH like has been the case for 20 years. You've got to be more creative and look at the biotech companies. You've got to look at industry. You've got to look at integrating and putting together programs that really attack the major health problems, and those are the kinds of problems that you don't solve with one person in one lab, and everybody will agree with that. You have to get teams to solve the major medical problems in this country or any country, and so you've got to be able to put a biochemist and a physiologist and a cardiologist and somebody in general family practice or somebody in rheumatology, and you've got to put teams together to approach those problems, and that's the real challenge that we've got to do now, and it's really no different than any other health science center would have at this point.
And you don't see that changing in the near future?
I think we're going to have a very changing situation, but again, if you look back 20 years, everything has been changing, and again, I think that's part of the excitement of where we are now and where we've been. It certainly is going to continue to change, but I see that as a positive thing. We have to recognize the challenges, and we can't be reactive. We've got to be proactive in looking at these things.
So you're also constantly writing grants and sending in proposals then to
Oh, yeah.
various agencies
Sure.
to keep the funding coming in.
Sent in 2 this week. One went yesterday and one went today.
And you probably got another in the works.
Oh yeah, sure, sure. That's a continual thing.
Do you have anything that you'd like to bring up? I know I probably missed a lot in my, shall we say, unfamiliarity with a lot of this kind of thing. Are there any areas that I missed that you want to touch on?
No, I just would say that, you know, I could go on for hours and tell you all kinds of anecdotal things and funny stories of things that have happened over the last 20 years or so. Some of them would have to be deleted because they would probably
We have to drop
drag me into court or something. But no, I can say that the reason I've been here for this length of time, and the one thing that I say when I try to recruit new people into this institution and explain to them, when I came to Texas, I thought I'd be in Texas maybe 5 years, and it's obviously been 25 years or something. The reason is the quality of the people and the attitude that we have in this institution. Again, it's not a big institution, but people work together and people have a very positive attitude. And that's not just in the institution, it's I think in the community too. There are big medical schools and big medical centers that I've been at and where competition becomes a detriment and you get people being reclusive and separating out into camps and in some cases fighting against each other. That's not the case here. People have disagreements, certainly, all the time. But I think this institution is fortunate in being small and people resolve their problems and continue working together very, very well. And when people leave here, who've never been here before, who we bring in to interview, the things that they say are, boy, I didn't know you guys at all. I was really surprised. You have beautiful facilities, of course, and they say the people here are so, you know, they seem to be working together and enjoying what they do. Now, I mean, that doesn't mean we're paying everybody what we should be paying them, and I'm sure everybody would agree with that. But I think there is a sense of camaraderie and collegiality in this institution that's probably envied by an awful lot of places.
It sounds like to me you don't view this as a job, but as a labor of love, if you will, from what I gather from talking with you today.
Well, this part you have to bleep out of the camera because if the dean gets it, he'll cut my salary. But no, I have said to many people, I mean, I love what I do, and I really wouldn't trade jobs with anybody. I like to love the people I work with. I think the institution has got tremendous potential to do things that we all working together can do. And so, I mean, I come into work very early in the morning because I like to come in to work and be here. And I'm not the only one. I'm not the first person in the parking lot at all, but we have a lot of folks who are dedicated to this institution.
Well, I didn't bring another release form with me to bleep out things. We may have to go. We may have
Don't
to go
tell the dean because he'll say, well, if Gracy will work for less than that, we'll cut his salary.
Well, I'll call him in about 10 minutes so so that he knows. Any other remarks you'd like to make before this goes to Dr. Cohen or Dr. Richards?
No, I think it's an outstanding idea that you have to put this program together. I think that it obviously should be more useful and interesting in retrospect, but getting people's views and looking at it 5 years from now and seeing, you know, how correct or how incorrect somebody was, I think gives people ahead of time a little clue as to, you know, where you go there and how wrong we've been and we haven't gone on a straight shot. We've tacked back and forth and had to change our tack because the wind blows different directions, and there's times the wind doesn't blow, and you know, you get frustrated when you sit and the wind isn't blowing. But then when the wind starts to blow, you got to figure out how to catch the best wind you can, and we've done that pretty well, I think. And I mean that for the institution, and I mean it for faculty, I mean it for everyone. So I look forward to where we're going, and I think we've got a good crew on board.
Well, I think definitely the remarks that you made here today will be useful in years to come, definitely. And I do appreciate you taking the time out of your extremely busy schedule. I know you have a meeting here, I think, relatively shortly that you have to get to, and I just appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, and hope we can do it again sometime. Dr. Gracy, you've lived up to everything I've heard about you in this hour I've spent with you, and I want to thank you.
Thanks very much, Blake. It's my pleasure.
And we'll wrap this up, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks very much. You too.